What
Good
are you
morning,
doing?
friends. Another Friday, 11 o'clock, and IAGS specialty webinar is on. When COVID struck the world, we didn't know that this will be so serious. But as we realized very early on, IAGS decided to start educational activities besides doing the social activities like supporting government hospitals fighting COVID by giving them PPEs and other issues. Now, so what we did, we started specialty seminars on Friday morning, Madhu, and the COVID awareness webinars on Sunday evenings. Now, we started with the common topics like gallbladder, appendix, hernia, endoscopies, and bariatric, being a perfectly elective surgery, was kept for the last. So now today, this is the last specialty webinar of IAGS, and we are going to talk about bariatric surgery, whether it should be done when the pandemic is over, and what will be its structure after the pandemic is over, when bariatric surgery will be started. And we have some wonderful panelists and my co-moderator, Dr. Amrit Nasta, who is a clinical associate with me for last 3.5 years, and panelists which includes past president of HOSI, Dr. Arun Prasad, uh, Dr. Jaideep Paleb, Dr. Praveen Raj, Dr. Ajay Kumar, Dr. Sandeep Agrawal, and Dr. Sumit Shah. So welcome to all the panelists on the show. And we are going to discuss, next slide please, Amrit. Yeah. So we are going to discuss these issues today. One is that COVID-19 has affected the surgery in general, especially laparoscopy. And lot has been discussed. I'm aware that each one of you are aware of the guidelines from various countries and our national guidelines. So we'll briefly mention that. And then we go on to the guidelines which are specific to bariatric surgery. And after that, the second issue we are going to discuss is the care of existing patients, operated patients of last so many years who need continued care, especially in bariatrics. So how are we going to support them? How they should be supported? What constitutes an emergency in bariatric patients? So that we are going to discuss. And then we are going to discuss what is the future of bariatric surgery? How do we open up? How do we restart bariatric surgery? How do we restart seeing patients in outpatients for bariatric surgeries? And how do we support them, like support groups after the bariatric surgery? Next. So very recently, about a week back, uh, all the three major associations of minimal access surgery, IAGS, AMASI, and CELSI, came together to jointly release guidelines. This was a historical moment for us because this is first time the three associations have done something together as an academic exercise. And I'm really, as the president of IAGS, it was so heartening to see equal amount of cooperation and enthusiasm on behalf of other two associations. So there was a long multi-page guideline, but briefly speaking, as you all know, that we stop all emergency surgeries. We only provide emergency surgeries. We stop all elective and surgical or endoscopic procedures. Non-essential staff should stay at home. We provide non-operative management wherever possible. A major thing is that we have a multidisciplinary team meetings in any surgical decision, because this is more relevant now, that if we have decided, let's say, to operate a complicated gallbladder, now it is going to affect not only the surgical team. The risk is not only its risk to the anesthetists, to nurses, and to post-operative hospital staff. So we should discuss it with other people in the team, that this is the reason why we are doing it, because they should be partner in your decision making. And that's important, multidisciplinary team meeting. And if there is a diagnosed COVID positive or a high risk or a suspect COVID positive case, then that should not be operated in regular hospital. That should be operated only in a COVID-19 center. So this is basically the background on which we will start today, and I'll ask my co-moderator, Dr. Amrit Nasta, to take over from here.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panelists. So the first question that we seek to answer today is why bariatric, being an elective procedure more or less, must stop. So I would like to invite Dr. Sandeep Agarwal to give us his views on this question, why bariatrics must stop. Dr. Sandeep Agarwal.
At the outset, I'd like to thank Dr. Raman Goyal for taking this initiative and involving me in this important panel discussion. Now, as we all know, as Dr. Raman said, there's a
Sandeep,
pandemic.
can you come closer to the mic, please? Yeah.
There's an ongoing pandemic.
Yeah.
Which is, only the numbers are only increasing. And hence, all elective surgeries must be deferred or postponed. And there are multiple reasons for that. One is that we need these elective surgery patients, when they're operated under pandemic conditions, and some of them may be asymptomatic carriers, may have a high morbidity and mortality following elective surgery, as has been seen in the initial experience from Iran. Subsequently, then can be a shortage of resources. So we need to conserve our resources for the COVID-19 positive patients and a possible second wave which may come later on. And also we need to protect our staff, our healthcare workers. And as I said aptly by the recommendations from IFSO, and this was published in Obesity Surgery recently, that there is no doubt that all elective metabolic surgery bariatric should stop. We should not be seeing these patients as of now. Only bariatric emergencies needs to be seen. And although we need to continue our care for operated patients, and we need to develop some protocols for that. So this was what I said, and this is what this slide shows, that due to these various reasons, we need to must stop the bariatric, all of us, irrespective of the city or town we belong to.
Amrit.
Dr. Goyal, your comments?
Amrit, next slide, please.
Yeah. So the next question that comes upon us is, do we have defined bariatric emergencies, bariatric semi-emergencies? What about the non-bariatric emergencies that we face in our patients? So I would like to invite Dr. Praveen Raj to throw some light upon this question. Dr. Praveen Raj, sir.
Yeah, hi. So I think it's a wonderful panel discussion that we've been having. I think thanks to Dr. Raman Goyal and team. So I think with regard to this time, I think definitely all the primary bariatric surgery, I think Dr. Sandeep Agarwal has clearly said, electives need to be stopped. But then, yes, we would be getting our patients whom we might have operated long back, might be coming with the complications like the internal hernias or some strictures or some bleedings, or sometimes with severe dysphasias, etc., wherein they are bariatric complications which needs to be addressed. And on the other side, more interestingly, we might be getting a lot of morbidly obese patients with other complications like, let's say, a perforated viscus, let's say an intestine obstruction, a gut ischemia, etc., wherein many of the times the anesthetist or the surgeons are not trained enough to handle morbid obese patients as such. Because especially anesthetists, both from the anesthesia standpoint and from the surgical standpoint, the technical difficulty is more higher in a morbidly obese patient compared to a thin patient. Work along with our non-bariatric to help them maybe even get the trocars inside, maybe even to create an hemoperitoneum. Bariatric anesthetists need to work with the anesthetist to make sure, because intubation is very difficult sometimes in these patients, and intubation is an aerosol generating issue as such. Although we have these big boxes through which intubations can be done, in obese patient that might be more trickier. So I think even in a non-bariatric emergency, if our bariatric team, from shifting the patient to surgery to anesthesia, can work with the non-bariatric colleagues, I think that will be something very important at this point. Use our bariatric knowledge to help. Secondly, with regard to bariatric emergencies, yes, there are some emergencies which require immediate attention. I would say intestinal obstruction, most common from internal hernia, is something, or maybe there is some perforations from a marginal ulcer from a GJ. So these are some things, yes, we cannot wait. We have to go in. But then maybe semi-emergent procedures as such, as classified by the Association of American College of Surgeons, maybe severe dysphagia, or maybe a malnutrition secondary to a bypass procedures, procedure with like a sleeve causing a severe GERD. Maybe we can wait for some more time. We can buy some time until we make sure the incidence of COVID is on the decreasing trend. then maybe we can think on these lines at down a stage. So I think we need to categorize a patient whether they require immediate attention, can we wait for some time, and purely elective, which we will definitely wait for much longer a time until we know better about what is really happening about COVID in our country and from around the world.
Praveen, I think that's very important message for the audience, that we are not only looking at the bariatric emergencies in bariatric patient. There could be emergency in a bariatric patient which is non-bariatric emergency. So somebody has a, let's say, an acute complicated appendicitis, and after a sleeve gastrectomy, and so who is going to manage this patient? A bariatric surgeon may not have access to this patient because this patient is a COVID positive patient and goes to a COVID hospital. So I think this has invited a situation, the COVID has made a situation where we will be called to look after these patients, not only in our own hospital, maybe in a COVID positive hospital. And just because the numbers are low at the moment is not a big relief. Numbers may go up when the lockdown goes away, and then we may. So at the moment, well, there's no relief in the sense that just because numbers are low, we must be prepared to face these emergencies maybe next 1 month or 2 months, and we should keep our attention very high on our patients. Follow up with them, that if any one of them turns COVID positive and goes to a COVID hospital with a surgical emergency, we should be in touch with those surgeons in those hospitals and support them. So thank you, Praveen. Amrit.
Yeah. So another problem that we are facing is, what about our old patients, the patients whom we have already operated? Since we are not able to hold elective OPDs, how do we support our already operated post-bariatric patients who were operated a few months back, a few years back, if they have some issues? So how do we tackle them? So first, I would like to invite Dr. Jaideep Palep and have his views on supporting the operated bariatric patients in this era. Dr. Palep?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Goel, for having this webinar. What we started doing in our bariatric patient population who we have already operated on as soon as the lockdown started, the first thing was that our team, we started calling up all our patients and just trying to reassure them that we are existent. Just because there is a lockdown, don't worry. We are still available. You can be free enough to just pick up the phone and call us, message us, email us, whichever part of the city, country, wherever you are. So that, I think, has helped us, because as soon as the lockdown started, we saw at least 2 emergencies in our operated bariatric patient population. We had a marginal ulcer bleed, which I could sclerose with endoscopy. Because our hospital is also treating COVID patients, it was easier to tackle the emergency, and the patient could come to the hospital and we could take care of it. Another patient who was living in a tier 3 town, tier 3 city, far away from Mumbai, a 4-hour drive from Mumbai, actually had some swallowing issues around 3 weeks post-surgery. A sleeve patient, and again the same thing, the patient managed to reach us on the phone, and we arranged for passes for the patient, and the patient came in the lockdown period and we managed to treat the patient again. So I think access to the surgeon is the most important and crucial thing that we must all realize, and it is our responsibility to the patients to make sure that we have called them and told them that we are accessible. We should be available for an online consult also. So there are many platforms which we can use to do these online consults, including as simple as a plain WhatsApp video call if you don't want to charge the patient. And of course, there are consulting platforms, professional platforms which are available. Encourage all your patients to stay with a close follow-up with you. If they have dietary issues, send a diary to you. You can use a lot of other platforms like YouTube, and Google, and Instagram, and videos to help them help disseminate a lot of information to them with regards to their diet and exercise. So all these tips can be provided to your patient at the touch of a button today, and make them as closely connected to you as possible.
Thank you, Dr. Palep. I would now like to ask Dr. Arun Prasad. We are being asked a common question by our patients, old patients and new. Is there any particular diet which is advised to protect us from this virus? So your views on any specialized diet for the bariatric patients in this era of COVID?
Thanks.
Dr. Arun Prasad, sir.
Firstly, congratulations to Dr. Goel for organizing this wonderful meeting. Now, diet has always been a key factor for all bariatric patients. When we talk about recovery, we talk about pre-op, intra-op, post-op. So naturally, when we are faced with this situation, patients are going to ask about diet. Now, diet has got important role in the sense, you could just complete the slide. We have fat soluble vitamins, we have the water soluble, we have the minerals, and we also have the amino acids and fatty acids, which are necessary for optimal immune function, which is to prevent establishment of viral infection, and also for immune regulation, which is to check uncontrolled proliferation of immune cells. Now, we all know that in an obese person, there is an ongoing inflammatory response which is already there. And this is probably what makes them prone to more complications and has been shown that they don't fare very well when they have a corona infection. So we know that nutrition is critical for the function of the T cells, B cells, killer cells, for elimination of the infectious microbes. Now, can you go back? Also, both native and adaptive immune function and prevent infection, keep the inflammation under control and prevent tissue damage. Finally, it is there to aid immune memory formation that helps prevent reinfection. So now nutrition is very crucial for all these cells to function. We know about vitamin cells, vitamin A. No, we just go by one. So vitamin A is important for the structure and function of the respiratory mucosal epithelium. It enhances mucosal immunity, which is very critical for prevention of respiratory infection, especially when we are dealing with the COVID situation. We have the vitamin B, E, C, zinc, selenium. These have the antioxidant roles, and these reduce the oxidative stress in the body, which is quite crucial when the surge takes place in these COVID patients when they are in the ICU. Then there is increased beneficial probiotic bacteria in the intestine to regulate gut microbiota, maintain intestinal integrity. One vitamin that has not been shown in this slide is vitamin D. Now, vitamin D deficiency has been shown to make people more prone to have complications of respiratory kind. So in fact, a lot of places have already been suggesting for patients to take vitamin D and vitamin C, not just patients, for the general public, to take vitamin D and C to improve their resistance and the response to this infection. So next slide. So all this should be there in our diet. I'm not going to go through the list of this, but we can see that by having a healthy diet, which is what we have been recommending to all our post-bariatric patients. Now, this healthy diet gains extra importance here because post-bariatric patients, even though they have had bariatric surgery, most of them would still be over a BMI of 25, hence at risk. So please advise all your patients to be extra careful with the nutrition and be in touch with you and your dietitian for this.
Dr. Aman Goel, sir, your comments? Sir, you have to unmute yourself.
So Arun, if you have to simplify this for a bariatric surgical team, what additional dietary requirements are required? You know, we have those post-bariatric vitamins, proteins, and supplements. So if you want to simply say that you need to add zinc or you need to add, what would be one or two take-home messages from here?
The take-home message is that usually with our bariatric patients, we are only concerned about their iron and protein. and we don't take that much interest in the vitamins. And here is a situation where the vitamins and the minerals are going to have an increased importance to help people build up their immunity and resistance, along with the regular exercise, which I think my next speaker is going to talk about.
Okay,
And
so I
Dr.
think
Pal-
one of the things that has been discussed repeatedly in media is zinc, role of zinc,
Yes.
and the zinc
The
required.
zinc is there as an antioxidant. So
That-
zinc and vitamin C act as antioxidant. Vitamin C, you see, traditionally is being, even since childhood, I remember my father used to give me vitamin C so that whenever we had common cold. So traditionally, vitamin C, even though it does not prevent any viral infection, it does help the body to recover faster from viral infections.
Right. So, just to clarify, because a lot of things are going on in the media, if you have to give zinc, if you just give a regular multivitamin with about 10 to 11 milligram zinc in it, that is enough to prevent infection in a way, whatever its role is. And those who are COVID positive, they should be getting about 50 to 60 milligram zinc a day.
Quite
So,
right.
so it is not necessary to add additional to have more zinc on a daily basis for the patients. A regular multivitamin usually has about 11 milligram zinc, and that is good enough that is the body's daily requirement. So Amrit, please.
Yeah, Dr. Paleb, sir.
Yeah, just one more thing to add to what Dr. Arun Prasad just mentioned about all these diets. And the problem right now that probably most of us will be facing is that our patients are saying that they are not able to get through to the nutritionist and the dietitian. So here again, what we are trying to emphasize is that it is the surgeon's role. So me and Dr. Nidhi Khandelwal and my team, we are trying to go out of our way to make sure that even the diets are being explained to the patient by us directly in case the nutritionists are not available because of whatever lockdown issues and personal issues. So that also needs to be kept in mind as a part of our responsibility.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. And another concern for most of our patients now, everyone is in lockdown, we are homebound. So how do we encourage our patients to exercise in this lockdown period? I would like to invite Dr. Sumit Shah to please share his views on this. Dr. Sumit Shah, sir. Sir, you will have to unmute.
Okay, just a minute.
Yeah, I did that. Please.
Yeah. So thank you again, Dr. Goel, and to IAGES for involving me in this important webinar. So we know that one of the important things what is happening in the lockdown is that we are all restricted to our homes. And therefore, definitely our level of activity, our ability to go to gym, our ability to go for that regular, 40-45 minute walk that we were doing, all that has gone down. But I think the counter thing is that what is nice is that, you have had lots and lots of people actually start putting videos on how they could exercise themselves at home. And I think there is a plethora of videos on which how you could do, starting from different types of yoga to some aerobic exercises to some strength training exercises, because it is very important that we keep up our metabolic rate. I think one thing that happens is that we know that, sitting down continuously is much worse than even getting up for 10 minutes in every 1 hour and walking. So, even small things matter. So if you are not able to go to the gym, if you are not able to do your regular walk outside, it doesn't mean that you cannot do anything. So there is loss of our daily routine that is there, but we could still do many exercises at home, and I think the internet is full of videos, not only from the trainers, but also from many celebrities, because the exercise or whatever physical activity you will do is not only important for weight maintenance, but also for your feeling of well-being. So we must remember that, the exercise produces certain hormones which increase the levels of your feeling of well-being, and also will increase your respiratory capacity, will increase your basal metabolic rate, and also keep you fit in this time.
Yeah, Dr. Arun Prasad, sir, you wish to add something?
Yes, you could advise people to go on to the YouTube and look for what is known as low impact exercises. And these are specifically made for the obese, because as I was mentioning earlier also, most of our bariatric patients, ex-bariatric and to-be bariatric patients, are at a BMI where regular exercises may not be possible for them. So low impact exercises on YouTube, and as Sumit mentioned, yoga would be a wonderful thing. And again, on YouTube, you can, you have an instructor and you follow that instructor, and it becomes very easy. In fact, I have been doing this for the last 1 month myself. That's why I raised my hand. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to ask Dr. Ajay Kumar, sir. Sir, are there any particular new things you are advising your old patients and supporting them? Dr. Ajay Kumar, sir.
Dr. Ajay, you will have to unmute yourself.
I have unmuted. Yeah.
Yes. No, Ajay, we can't hear you. You have to unmute. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Now you can hear me, I think. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Good morning to everybody. And let me congratulate Raman Goyal sir and team for the excellent effort. And what we do here is we have stopped completely the bariatric procedures, but we keep in touch with our patients regularly with telemedicine. The exercise Dr. Arun Prasad sir was talking about, we advise them home exercises, and many of them are regularly doing it. But the problem we face here is the dietary restriction becomes little bit loose now, because people are sitting there at home and tend to eat more. So we caution them, please limit your diet as advised, and we are connecting them to the dietitian regularly. That is what we are doing now, and so far we have not had any problems in our bariatric patients. One patient we had to do a hysterectomy because the patient was having severe bleeding, and that is a patient who underwent MGB. That patient we did hysterectomy in an urgent or semi-urgent basis. That patient is doing well. I think since we have stopped elective bariatric, the management of the patients in the lockdown period is not a big problem, because we can regularly contact them by telemedicine, and people are doing it also. And even otherwise, more than 50% we are doing by teleconsultations. I think we did not face any problem so far. The problem comes when there is an emergency in a post-bariatric patient. Luckily, we did not have such a patient so far.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Sandeep Agarwal, sir, you wish to add something?
So, I thought, this couple of points. One was that there, as we have done, we've given emergency contact numbers for almost 3 doctors, who are contactable 24/7 for any query which requires urgent attention, as well as regular numbers for contacting outside the emergency hours. And the second point about exercises is that we have a physical trainer who provides services on voluntary basis. So we have formed a WhatsApp group of the patients with the physical trainer, and they post their daily exercise. One exercise is posted daily. They're very simple exercises like chair exercises using just a simple chair and just floor exercises, and they're all posted on our website of our foundation also. So, and I can share the link with whomsoever wants, and any patient can go and learn those simple exercises, and they are pretty useful.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that is a very nice way of helping our patients in this period. You should be sharing with them videos to exercise. There are a lot of online yoga classes which are also happening. So that's good to hear. Yes, Raman, sir.
So, if we look at in totality, I think it's very important that we support our operated patients. When the times were normal, we knew that our operated patients were our biggest resource with a bariatric surgeon or bariatric team. Now they need us more than what they needed us earlier. So I think this talk about how do we support these patients, and especially Dr. Arun Prasad's mention about low impact exercises for obese, and as So I think these are all very important issues, and I'm happy that we could take up this discussion here, because it's not about stopping the elective surgery or being only emergency surgery, but more important is how do we support these patients. And moving forward, Amrit, next slide, please. Yeah. Now let's discuss the overall how the bariatric will evolve over a period of months or year from here, because it looks very different, very difficult at the moment. Amrit, can you go back on the previous slide? Yeah. So Amrit, you can talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah, so going forward, how do we resume? What is the timeline? Is it going to be weeks or months after which we can go back to performing our routine elective bariatric work? What is the procedure selection? What are the guidelines as they are coming, inter-association guidelines, international guidelines from IFSO? When can we resume our elective surgery? At this stage, who are the correct patients? What are the correct procedures? What is the screening? What are the OT concerns? So all these issues need to be discussed, need to be highlighted, and we have to form like a flow chart of how to go about. So let Dr. Aman Goel sir begin with this journey going forward.
Yeah, I've been following what has been discussed in various groups within India, outside India. It's basically a sense of restlessness to open up, as we are talking of lockdown, restlessness to start working, restlessness to do bariatric surgery. But let me remind you that only those places, I have been to a village in UK in March, which is called Iam, which was affected by plague. And the way they saved themselves, they quarantined themselves for a long time. People died in their families in every house, and still they survived. And so we are going in it for a long haul. Just 6 weeks of lockdown or stopping work should not be the end of an emergency. Emergency is unfolding now. When the lockdown will stop, it's possible that numbers will increase. Government has done a wonderful job by reducing the numbers, but this cannot go on forever. And so should we start bariatric surgery now, after 3 months, after 6 months, 12 months, is practically not a discussion issue, because this will happen when the situation will change, not when we are in the middle of a situation. And then I'll ask the panelists, Amrit will ask, what procedure should be done? Should we do a simple procedure which can be done quickly in 40 minutes, or we do a more complicated procedure which will take 1.5 to 2 hours to reduce the risk? Because there are studies which says if there's any procedure more than 30 minutes, you should change the surgeon to reduce the risk. Who should be doing it? There are mentions that a senior surgeon with experience should do it, but if senior surgeon is more than 60-year-old, should he be exposing himself to a potential risk of COVID, or should a younger surgeon be doing it? And who is an ideal candidate? So we think that if somebody is more sick, he deserves the surgery first. But now, because bariatric surgery first, but now there is a situation that already there is a potential risk of COVID infection. So should we do a younger patient who has less risk of mortality after COVID positivity after a bariatric surgery? So these are the issues which I think we should discuss in this session. Amrit?
Yes, so first I would like to bring back Dr. Arun Prasad sir to give us his views and to discuss the IFSO guidelines regarding resuming elective bariatric procedures. Dr. Arun Prasad sir?
Yeah, I was part of the webinar which was going on with IFSO, and one thing which was very clear was that whenever we resume bariatric surgery, screening and precaution measures have to be taken strictly, just like they were being done during the pandemic. So even when the pandemic is over, we will have to continue very strictly, which would mean your investigations for the corona test, antibody test, maybe the requirement of HRCT of the chest before we proceed for the surgery. So the way bariatric surgery was being done, things are going to change. Next slide, please. So how are we going to start? So firstly, it has to be gradual. You need to prioritize your patients who needs surgery more urgently. Straightforward cases have to be started first, as Raman was mentioning earlier, and gradually we go up to the complex cases where the possibility of post-op complications or ICU is there. Because right now you need to save your ICU for the corona cases. So we would not be risking any patient who may need post-op ICU. Next slide, please. So short surgery to reduce morbidity, like sleeve gastrectomy, which most experienced surgeons would do it within half an hour. And the aggressive surgeries like bypass and BPD should be taken as the back seat. Next slide, please. So who will be eligible when we start? Asymptomatic patients who don't have flu symptoms, no fever, no GI symptoms, no history of COVID positive, age relatively younger. Avoid patients with comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, cardiac disease. These three have been known killer when it comes to obese patients getting corona infection. No pulmonary diseases, OSA, asthma, etc., and non-smokers. So we need to start with these people. Full precautions and PPE have to be there. Detailed history taking and prompt chest CT. Also, the RT-PCR is essential in diagnosing and controlling the disease. If surgery is needed, laparoscopy may be a better than open surgery. Now, a lot of debate has been going on with that. I am strongly believing that laparoscopy has to be preferred because you have a closed, confined space. The hospital stays less, so you have beds availability, less need for post-op clinic visits, less exposure to body tissue and fluids. The surgical smoke and laparoscopic gas is what needs to be addressed. And I think eventually all operation theaters are going to be equipped with surgical smoke evacuators and laparoscopic gas handling facilities. Now, we don't have negative pressure OT. So what most theaters would be doing is closing the positive pressure half an hour before the procedure and restart it half an hour after all the sanitization has been done. But what is crucial is that it has to be done by the most experienced surgeons with standard full precautions and smoke filters. So the topic of young surgeons versus old surgeons, we'll have to leave it for another discussion. Next slide, please. So finally, Raman had asked me to make a statement as past president of OSSI. So you can see that OSSI has got a mask now, and we are moving with the COVID times. So great things happen to those who don't stop believing, trying, learning, and being grateful. And this webinar, which has been wonderfully organized by Raman, is a clear example of his bold moves and his leadership qualities. Please move on to the next.
Yeah, so I think, Arun, this is very important that we define where we are going, because it's very important that we identify the kind of patients. I saw in your slide you mentioned 20 to 50 years for patients also. So what I have realized, and it's a personal experience, most of the doctors who have died in this country till now, after COVID came, were above 60 years, most of them. There's a family physician in Thane who was 82 years and he died recently. And I saw that the patients were saying he is providing great service. He is seeing patients during the COVID era. This is not great service. This is almost like a suicide. So anybody who is above 60 years, whether it's a surgeon or a patient, should keep away from the hospitals as much as possible. And the same thing happened in Chennai, same thing happened in Kolkata. So I think all those who are seeing this webinar, if you have to take one message, those above 60 years, doctors, please keep away from hospitals. Those below 60, like how Mumbai police has done, that even if you are 55 years and have comorbidities, policemen should not be put on duty.
In fact, today's headlines say that 34% of the deaths are between 45 and 60. So maybe the Indian age you might have to bring it below 60.
That's right. So if comorbidities are there, please keep away. You are not doing a great service to humanity. You are doing a lot of disservice to yourself and your family. So Amrit, please.
So one of the issues is the extremes of age. So as they are saying, the people at more risk are those who are more elderly. Another thing, the outcomes of COVID-19 are worse in people who have comorbidities. So younger people also with comorbidities have a worse outcome. Now I would like to bring back Dr. Sumit Shah. So what is the available literature on comorbidities or obese with COVID? Because we know that obese individuals have more comorbidities. So, sir, what is the available literature on that? Dr. Sumit Shah, sir.
So, am I unmuted? Yeah, yes, thank you. So, this is very, very interesting. We have never linked the, morbidity or mortality related to chronic diseases to an infectious disease. So we know that, obese people do worse in cancers. The obese people will do worse they have chronic kidney disease, chronic disease, and so many other disease has, to my knowledge, never been clearly. We don't say that patients with malaria or tuberculosis or Japanese encephalitis or so many other infectious diseases will do worse. And not even in the previous influenzas do I know that there was an association of the obese patients doing worse during an infectious disease. But what is different in this SARS, this CoV-2 era, that is what has happened in this infection, is that we know that the obese patients are faring far worse. And these are not necessarily obese patients who are faring worse because they have associated diabetes, hypertension, or coronary artery disease. Of course, like it was mentioned in the discussion earlier, age remains the most important factor for morbidity and mortality in this coronavirus infection. But apart from age, obesity is now being found. And why is that? Because, a very high frequency of the patients who are getting admitted into the ICU are obese. And also, the recommendations are that the obese patients should take even more precautions to prevent, any kind of COVID-19 infections. And the third finding that has come out is those who are young and those who are obese. So, we think that your youth protects you against the infection. But if you are young and you are obese, then these patients are becoming sick very, very quickly. And this data has come from New York. And, there is another, can we go on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So this is another study which was reported in the Clinics of Infectious Disease. And it says that the COVID-19 is hitting patients with obesity particularly hard, and BMI is playing a role. It decides on who needs intensive care and who survives. So they saw 180 patients which were hospitalized between March 1 to 30, and the most prevalent underlying conditions for ages 18 to 49, which we were saying is protective age, because we are all talking about age all the time. But those who were between 18 to 49, and they 59% of those who were admitted to the ICUs were actually less than 60 years, but with BMI more than 35, are at least twice as likely to be admitted to the ICU for coronavirus than with healthy BMI. And this is now been reported in literature. I find it absolutely amazing because, then we are talking about younger patients, we are talking about so-called being healthier, and still they are going to the ICUs. And this has been, next slide, please. Yeah, and this has also been sort of, replicated. This is the same study. We'll go back to another study. This is the same study which says that, obesity in people less than 60 years is a newly identified risk factor, epidemiological risk factor, which may contribute to the increased morbidity rates experienced in the USA. So we know US is one of the most severely obese countries across the world. Their average levels of BMI across almost all the states is more than 30. And that is why it may be experiencing a particularly bad results when patients get transferred to the ICU. Next slide, please. So this is the largest US study, again coming out of New York, of the obese patients with COVID-19 infection. Again, they also found that the obesity was the single biggest factor after age in those patients which had to be admitted to the hospital. So this is from Dr. Christopher Petrilli of the NYU Langone School of Medicine. And they said that the chronic condition with the strongest association with the critical illness with COVID-19 infection was obesity and had substantially higher odds ratio than cardiovascular or pulmonary diseases. So again, they similar kind of findings. There is also a French study which also says associates a higher BMI with more sick patients even at a younger age. So I think this should be realized. This is a very important factor. For the first time, we are relating obesity to poor outcome in an infectious disease epidemic. And now the literature is becoming more and more clear. Next slide, please. So that is why when we say that we should prevent not only the elderly, we should also prevent the obese to take additional measures. That is especially related to all of us because we take care of bariatric patients. Now resuming elective surgery after COVID-19. So now we have all said that Dr. Goyal had said that everybody is becoming restless. We are surgeons, sitting 1 month out of the operating room is very, very difficult for us. And it is natural to become frustrated or to think that this infection is being overplayed. But that is not the scenario. And the present scenario is that, we have postponed all elective surgeries or deferred them. And of course, it will increase the backlog when these patients come back for surgery. But to say that, what could be a roadmap for resumption? Safety, like we always have said that, you can never be safe enough. So there is always some more additional thing that you can do for safety. Resuming surgery, elective surgery, bariatric surgery at this point of time is particularly difficult, and it is dangerous because, one wrong result, maybe even if it is unrelated to your COVID-19 pandemic, but one wrong result will get labeled as being a bad outcome, because the bariatric surgery was done during the COVID-19 pandemic. It will be difficult for us to excuse ourselves and from, amongst peers, amongst any sort of inquiry that's treated, and very difficult to explain why the bariatric surgery was done which is usually considered to be a super elective operation in this scenario. So resuming, before I go on to the resuming 8-point this roadmap on what we can do, I would like to sort of request my co-panelists to say that that if what is their they have read literature on this, obese patients faring badly. So therefore, what is their opinion on, obesity and COVID-19? Maybe Dr. Sandeep Agarwal wants to make a point about that. Amrit?
Yes.
Yeah, can you? Yeah, can you repeat, Dr. Sandeep?
So thanks, Sumit. Yeah. I think what you said is absolutely right, that the safety is the first priority when we are considering resumption of surgery, as you have shown enough data to show that obese patients have a high morbidity when they get COVID. And I'm sure they will have a high morbidity as well as mortality if they're operated and they turn out to be COVID positive. So that has to be a first priority, that we have to be guided by the curve of the COVID-19. We should be clearly going down for a while, as well as our own local and national authorities guidelines, because we cannot do surgery without their giving us green signal. So I would completely agree that safety, not only of the patients, but also healthcare workers, is of paramount importance.
Yeah, so the American College of Surgeons and the American Surgical Association have said that we need to have a roadmap on how to start the surgery or when we can start the surgery. So I'll just speak briefly about that. So next slide. First, know that there cannot be one recommendation across all geographical, are the number of hotspots in the place where you are or not. So very important local, you take district to zone and then around your own hospital. So go hyper local, see what is happening in your area before you decide to do anything else. Organization by your local health authorities, so which is also very important because health is a state subject in India, and therefore we have to look at what is the authorities. And of course, the safety of the patients and healthcare staff is always our first priority in all clinical practice. The idea is that we should not be doing more harm. Primum non nocere, that is our guiding light always, that first do no harm to the patient, no harm to the healthcare staff. And of course, whenever we start, the number of surgeries should be very controlled. And recently, I think Dr. Goyal told us that, Madhya Pradesh government came out with a specific guideline that the bariatric surgeries will not be started for at least a month. So there can be these kind of local state guidelines, which also will need to be seen. Next slide, please.
I think, Sumit, so you have a wonderful point. Just to put the record straight, it was not about bariatric surgery, all elective surgeries. That
right.
Madhya Pradesh circular was there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, that because this, health is a state subject, and we were just discussing that there could be different guidelines from your state, from your municipal authorities, from your locality, from your hospital. So you need to look at so many factors. If you are working in a hospital, which is a completely non-COVID hospital, and you get an emergency and the patient turns COVID positive, this patient could be shifted to some COVID hospital where you will lose complete control on what is happening with the patient. So I think these hyper-local issues are very important, and each one of us needs to see our own setup, our own scenario when we decide. And the one last thing I would like to say is that, make sure that you have resumed some more non-critical operations other than bariatric before you go on to bariatric. So whether it is gallbladder surgery, hernia operations, make sure that your hospital, your system has resumed doing some other non-critical operations apart from bariatric before you start with the bariatric operation first.
Yeah, I think you have summarized this very well. That 2 points. One is that the obesity is additional risk factor for during COVID period, because we all operate on obese patients, so we are though it's a high risk factor for any surgery, but here it's a high risk factor for COVID infection and its morbidity. Though we have seen logical discussion happening, but science is not always logical. Science is more about statistics. So the data that says that the more people who are getting into ICU, more people who are dying because of COVID is more important than just thinking logically in our mind and creating a awareness that we should operate them so that the risk reduces. So I think if we have this message, that would be wonderful. So Amrit?
Yeah, so very nicely, two glaring questions that we are going to face. One is going to be, if we perform a bariatric procedure and the patient gets a complication, we have to get the blame. Why did we do an elective surgery? And the second thing is, if we are operating in a non-COVID setup hospital and the person gets a complication and gets shifted to a COVID setup, the patient goes out of our control. And then these are the issues that have to be addressed, which is why we have to take a call on when we can resume elective bariatric procedures altogether. So now, when we are going to start, I would like to bring back Dr. Praveen Raj sir. What are the screening modalities additionally which are going to be done, and how do we select the ideal patient for bariatric procedure in this new era of COVID? So Dr. Praveen Raj sir.
Yeah, hi Amrit. So I think that was a wonderful discussion from Sumit on when do we start bariatrics. But I think the time, we need to move on. I think with a lot of green zones coming in, I think maybe gradually and slowly and steadily some bariatrics can be started. But I think at this point, although we do not have any clear-cut guidelines or any standardizations on preoperative investigations, but I think it's very sure I think with the availability of RT-PCR in almost all the major cities, I think every patient will need to get an RT-PCR definitely. And I think there is a lot of discussion on combining the RT-PCR with the antibody testing, although there are some ongoing controversies with regard to the antibody testing. But then at least in the early phases, it is the RT-PCR is very sensitive, and the late phases, the antibody. So it is generally recommended if the antibody testing starts coming up, we start doing both for all the patients. But interestingly, a CT of the chest, a high resolution CT of the chest, is also showing a very good sensitivity in picking up on the lung related changes. So maybe I think to begin off with, we have to be extra careful with over time, with over data. Maybe we can start reducing these. But to begin with, I think an RT-PCR combined with an antibody testing and a CT screening of the chest is probably something to begin off with in the earlier phases, which we need to be doing. And I think as you see it in the slide, I think to begin with, let's clearly avoid, let the surgeon and the patients not be above 60 years of age. Maybe even we can look at even 50 or 55 also. And with regard to selection of a patient, probably I will have a 3-point approach in the way that we would like to select the patients. I think to begin with, to piloting, because we might have a lot of difficulties in patient positionings, putting all the PPEs in place. The staffs might be getting used to it. The anesthetists might be getting used to these anesthesia boxes through which they will have to be intubating. The surgeons also with all the PPEs putting in there, doing the first few surgeries might be difficult. So I think to begin off with, we can do the straightforward, young, non-comorbid patient for a few cases, just to understand the difficulties in the intraoperative setting and the perioperative setting. But once we tide over this initial few cases, I think the next set of patients should be, I think, patients in whom morbid obesity might compromise the quality of life. Let's say, for example, a severe diabetic patient, a patient with a hernia, which is slightly incarcerated, where we might be doing both together. A patient with a mild to moderate OSA. I'm clearly saying mild to moderate. Severe OSAs are very high risk. Mild to moderate kind of an OSAs. Patient maybe with an osteoarthritis. So these kind of patients, wherein even the intra-association guidelines have clearly said, try to start off with surgeries wherein waiting for 3 months might compromise their quality of life in terms of pain or nutrition issues, etc. So those should be the patients which we go on to the next, because here bariatric surgery will be a quality improving procedure or a life-saving procedure also. Maybe we should reserve the very high risk patients like the severe obstructive sleep apneas, etc. maybe as a third set. So in this order, maybe we can start beginning and doing our procedures is what I think. Although we do not have any guidelines to guide us, of course, in Aussie, we are trying to bring up a guideline manual, which will be available shortly. But I think this kind of a 3-step approach might be an approach that we can consider when we are beginning bariatric surgeries.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite Dr. Sandeep Agarwal, sir, on pre-op screening, testing, and most important, the OT care and the OT concerns that we are going to face. Sandeep Agarwal, sir.
Thank you, Amrit. So there is a lot of controversy about whether all patients required COVID testing prior to surgery, and there is still no clear-cut message from the various literature appearing in various journals. So conventionally, an RT-PCR is the most specific test. It's not as sensitive. Literature shows it to be sensitivity about 70%, but I had a word with our microbiologist today. They said most of these reports have been done on oropharyngeal swabs, and that there has been no peer review of most of these articles. So in their own experience, it's a fairly sensitive as well as specific test. So that is one, but I think most of us agree that RT-PCR test should be done prior to surgery. Regarding antibody tests, the sensitivity is very high, but the specificity is low. But again, the problem is currently we don't have very reliable kits, and unless those kits become available in future, we can maybe say that at present we can just rely on the PCR test. And as Praveen said, there are various reports that HRCT has shown more sensitivity than RT-PCR in picking up COVID-19. And hence, a lot of us believe, we had a discussion about Aussie guidelines about a few days back, that an HRCT done as close to the surgical time as possible, maybe a day prior or on the morning of surgery, is probably one of very good methods of picking up a asymptomatic disease. There are some issues about attendant testing and there's no doubt that the medical team should be tested negative for COVID-19. Next slide, please. There are various algorithms given, and since we do not have a reliable antibody test at present, I will not go into it. Suffice to say that the whole philosophy should be to diagnose a case as positive if we suspect, and do the testing which is available in your hospital or in your state, and based on that take a considered decision on whether to proceed for surgery or not. These have been given in various articles, but I think till we have a reliable antibody test, we really cannot follow that protocol. So as I said, HRCT has been found to have a good sensitivity, and if available in your hospital, or you can ask the patient to get it done prior to admission, it would be a very good adjunct to your excluding a COVID-19 disease. As far as the medical team is concerned, it's a given that all staff in the OT should definitely be asymptomatic. They should have no high risk factors for COVID-19. They should have been tested for COVID-19 where the tests available, and they should work only in the non-COVID areas, not in the COVID or COVID suspect areas. And they should all wear a prescribed PPE. And now the problem with PPE is that what is a full PPE, and there's a lot of confusion about that. And ideally, next slide, please. Sorry, it's not. So ideally, a PPE would include a proper face mask, which is N95 or FFP3, a face shield or goggles, impervious gown or a coverall, shoe covers, and double gloves. So this is what is prescribed, and there is a controversy whether coverall is required or a impervious gown is okay. I think it will all depend on the availability ultimately. All these are guidelines, and we should obviously have to rely on what is available in our own hospital and do with that. And so now considering the operative room measures, now I think in the meantime, when we are waiting for surgery to resume, we should all start preparing our operative rooms for the future surgical practice. One of the most essential things is that the bariatric surgical patient should be operated in a cold COVID negative facility. That means these OTs should not be taking any emergency cases or COVID positive cases. There should be clear-cut checklist for anesthetists, nursing, and surgical teams, which should be now modified because of the COVID-19 situation. The OT should have a negative pressure system so as to not spread the virus to the staff. We should keep the OT personnel to the minimum. And I think Dr. Arun talked about experienced surgeons being there. I think one of our experts felt that we should have 2 experienced surgeons operating so that we minimize the time. And also we should keep sufficient time between the cases so as to sanitize the OT area as well as follow all the checklists, which will take more time. And then there was some talk about smoke evacuation systems. I think all of us should prepare for having a smoke evacuation system, which are made by several companies. They cost a little bit, but I think it will be almost an essential item on a menu, OT menu in future. We should avoid release of pneumo in between the cases when we're putting trocars. Ideally, balloon tip trocars should be used through small cuts. Their vent should be closed. And all these precautions which aims at decreasing the aerosol contamination of the OT is absolutely essential. And for that, I think all the checklist and the prior rehearsal and a proper area for don and doffing, all the staff must be trained prior to resumption of OT in proper donning and doffing of PPE, because PPE itself may not work if somebody makes a mistake while doffing, which is our usual time when problem occurs. So I think operating room measures are extremely important because we are at risk of aerosol contamination, contamination aerosol. And during this waiting period, all of us can develop checklists, protocols, SOPs, training, etc., to develop a system which will be safe when we resume our surgery. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So, Sandeep, one question for you.
Yeah.
You said the operating team should be tested. Now, when and how frequently the operating team should be tested? That is a question. And will it be allowed? If they are asymptomatic, should they be tested? I mean, obviously, if they are symptomatic, they have to be tested. But if they are asymptomatic, will the government allow us to be tested? And how frequently that testing should be done?
So I know, I don't have very clear-cut answer to that. Obviously, these are dictated by the national guidelines as well as availability of the testing kits. In an ideal situation, everybody should be tested frequently for COVID-19 by RT-PCR or antibody test. But I think in less than ideal conditions, at least those who have high risk factors, close contact with a family member or coming from a hotspot, or other risk factors should definitely not be a part of the team and should be tested, and only if negative should be made a part of the team.
Okay, one more question for you. Since you are part of the All India Institute and which is defining the policies, and you are also treating COVID patients, in the PPE, I find a lot of confusion. There is so much talk about the quality of coverall, but what is more important, N95 mask, a goggle, or a very good quality coverall, just to make things clearer?
So I think as far as the discussions I could make out from our various faculty members today itself in a meeting today, it's the coverall which is not so important. As long as we have an impervious gown, a good face shield or a goggles or both, a good fitting N95 mask, and some sort of shoe cover and double gloves. According to them, for most cases, especially I think they're talking about emergency situations, should suffice. So I'm sure they will suffice for the elective scenarios as well. Only in cases there is a high risk of suspicion of COVID, in our scenario where COVID test is negative, but there's a high suspicion otherwise, would they allow a full PPV? That means a good level 3 coverall. So because I think one of the reasons maybe we need to ration our resources, and second, maybe we do not need that. So I think that the current level at AIIMS, we have everything available, but for low risk cases or where suspicion is low, I think a coverall is not considered essential.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, this, the NICE guideline says that goggle and N95 mask is most important.
Yeah.
And even in COVID ward, if you're not seeing the patient or if you're not going on an aerosol generating procedure, they prescribe a plastic apron, the way we wear when we scrub for surgery, when we wash up for surgery, what we wear inside. Just that plastic apron is enough. So all this talk of coverall of 70 GSM, 90 GSM is actually not relevant. This is very ambitious guidelines. What we need is, as what you said, a impervious, a fluid resistant coverall is more than enough. More important, I think, more than the face shield, a tight fitting goggle is more important, because you have to restrict movement of during an aerosol generating procedure, virus going through. So whether it is going through the mask, N95 or through the goggle. So I think, thank you so much. Let's move on.
Just one quick point about aprons, plastic aprons. We know plastic aprons are not full sleeves. They are just like a half sleeved, equipment. So if you don't have an impervious gown, you can wear it below a good gown, but I think still will not protect you completely as a good impervious gown will do. That's all I want to add.
About a splash, if somebody sneezes on you, no coverall is airtight. So it doesn't matter whether it's 70 GSM or 90 GSM.
I agree on that point.
The air is going to go from the neck, from the down, from the back. You're not like an astronaut who is in a space suit.
Yeah, so, I agree completely.
Somewhere the discussion is going in a wrong way overall. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
I just wanted to make a point regarding the testing of doctors, So this testing business, it's like the milestones are changing very frequently, and there is also a lot of confusion regarding, in different states, and what is the ICMR policy regarding elective testing of patients and elective testing of the healthcare staff. So, even though ICMR is not saying it could be institution based. At least in the institution that I am working, our institution has declared that, we have 24,000 people on rolls, and each one of them is going to get tested. And already till, this is about a week back, more than 3,000 healthcare people, staff, including nurses, doctors, everybody had already got tested. Having said that, we have to realize the challenge, because, there is a resource problem. We cannot keep getting tested again and again. And also, one patient it's not a question of the surgeon having tested himself, being negative or not, because he's exposed to a food, F&B guy. They are exposed to the security guards. They are exposed to the nurses. They are exposed to the general duty staff. So I think for those people who say, or those patients who come and tell you that, doc, you are testing me for being COVID negative, but how about you? Are you COVID negative? So I think the answer is that it is not possible to keep testing almost the entire healthcare staff over and over again. The cost and the logistics of it would be very, very difficult, apart from the fact that the current guidelines of ICMR does not allow for that.
Okay, Dr. Paleb, sir.
Yes, just to add to the same point, one of the hospitals where I work in Mumbai has given us a very straightforward guideline. I don't know if it works for across the board in India, that first of all, you need to restrict yourself to working in only one hospital. And if you're doing so, then the healthcare personnel has to get tested every 14 days. And if you're working in more than one hospital, so they have allowed only 1+1, one additional hospital, then you need to get tested and you have to declare it. So you have to be sincere enough to declare it that I'm going to you and I'm going to one other hospital. So then you get tested every 7 days. Now, obviously the feasibility, the availability of kits, the number of testings we are doing, whether all those things are logistically possible or not are a separate matter of debate.
Okay, Dr. Arun Prasad, sir.
Yeah, same point as Jaideep. A single test is of no value, like what Sumit was mentioning. If you have to test every fortnight, or you become selective in your testing, like what Raman was saying.
Okay, thank you, sir. To the last part of today's talk, what is the future of support group meetings? We know how important support group meetings are in our bariatric practice. So I would like to bring back Dr. Paleb to share his views on the future of support groups.
Thank you, Amrit. So next slide, please. So what we have already started doing in our practice is we are holding fortnightly support group meetings with our patients, obviously virtually, and preferably nowadays using the video platforms like Zoom and Google Duo and Hangouts, Skype. But we have been using Zoom. It looks pretty safe with a password protected format. And unusually, we are seeing actually far more attendance in bariatric support group meetings than when we used to have them physically, calling them to places like our hospital or some neutral place which was outside the hospital. Now the numbers have suddenly gone up. Even our international patients from different states of the country are all logging in because it's easy. And I think one of the most important things that we are doing is like what was mentioned earlier by Sumit about talking about exercises, what Sandeep had mentioned about how they are giving small videos. We are actually practicing what we preach. We are doing the exercises with the patients, and we have seen a tremendous response with that. And I think I'd given a small video clip also. I don't know whether it's there incorporated in this thing. It was a 20-second clip, but it's there on our Facebook page in case it's not part of the presentation. You can see that this is a screenshot of one of the support group meetings which we held, and it's going over 2 pages. There are 26 participants here. In another support group meeting, we had around 40 participants. So it's just increasing. So me and Nidhi are taking care of making sure that we have more and more participation, and we actually are doing the exercises with them. We are actually dancing with them. And that's how it's picking up. And now the patients really know that they have access to us directly. It's not about just dancing or exercising, but in all possible ways. They have to talk to us, they can discuss. So we have 15 minutes of exercise, 15 minutes of Q&As, 15 minutes of tackling individual problems. They write on the chat format and we reply to them. So I think this is the future of bariatric surgery. We are not sure when we are going to be able to start this whole thing once again. when we are going to start elective procedures, we have to be really, really careful in starting, because there, like Praveen mentioned, there are some green zones already, and they are thinking they probably will start operating. But we are still in a red zone, and we are in a, our numbers are growing up exponentially daily. If you read in the newspapers every day, so it's anybody's take who will start first, who will start next, whatever is going to happen. But all the same, we need to be very, very careful. It is one of the most super elective procedures, as Sumit has already mentioned. We can't take our chances with our patients, with ourselves, with our families, and most importantly, medico-legally, we have to tread very, very carefully.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Palib. I would like to bring back Dr. Aman Goel to summarize today's meeting and share his final comments.
So Jaideep, I think that was very good what you mentioned. I think there is another angle to the whole thing. Bariatric is as such in the limelight, in the gaze of media. If somebody does surgery in any part of the country and 2 or 3 patients have major complications, it is going to reflect on everybody across the country.
That's correct.
I think it's not about the local issue, whether your numbers have gone down or whether you're in green zone or red zone. It's a question of its implication on the entire bariatric community and on that particular patient's family. So, and this issue, which is also has to be realized, that though the overall complications in bariatric is not very high now, it's less than about 1%, but we know that there is a possibility of the person getting infected with COVID in post-operative period, maybe 5 days later, maybe 15 days later, and then patient goes in a quarantine center or a COVID hospital for 2 weeks or for 28 days, depends on which state you are. And then what about the nutrition? Nobody is going to give them the high protein nutrition that is typically advised after surgery, or the protein shakes or vitamins there. So I think it's not only about how do you do surgery, but how you manage these patients if unfortunately somebody gets COVID. And then if on top of it, a person develops a bariatric complication, a leak maybe 20 days later, and patient is in a hospital in some smaller city, in a district hospital, who is going to manage that leak? With surgeon, general surgeon may not have that experience of managing bariatric leaks, and it could be a disaster. So I think it's very important that next slide, please, that we realize at the moment, please, let's not even think about starting bariatric surgery. Let the COVID peak go away. We have not reached the peak because we have been able to defer it with the lockdown. Let's wait for the peak to come and then things improve, as has been discussed in today's webinar by Sumit, that there are definite guidelines, 8-point guidelines. But also it's important that at this moment, we look for non-bariatric emergencies in bariatric patients. So if somebody comes with a pain in abdomen, it may not be a bariatric emergency, but we are committed to manage those patients. We support our operated patients with better nutrition. They need, as most of the patients must be calling us, calling you also, that how do I increase my immunity? So Dr. Arun Prasad has very nicely pointed out what could be the food that can be taken, what supplements should be taken, and as Sumit said, what exercises can be done even when you are logged in your own house. And I think we should have a graded approach to elective surgery, wait for the peak to pass, wait for clear 14 days of no cases being reported, not only in your city or not only in your zone, but at least in your state or maybe in that cluster of states. And after that, we start identifying low-risk patients, strategizing patients, only experienced surgeons who can definitely quickly finish a surgery with full protection. And I repeat again, a multidisciplinary team approach. Don't be in a hurry to start surgeries. Safety first. This is as Jaideep nicely said, it's a super elective surgery. yes, we always called it life-saving surgery, but now is a time when we should save lives of our patients who are precious for their family and the society. So I think these are the take-home messages. I will ask Amrit to ask everybody, panelists, to give a brief message, and we can take questions thereafter.
Thank you, Dr. Goel, for summing it up so well. First to Dr. Sumit Shah. Sir, you wish to add something?
Yeah, I think that, the only thing that I wanted to add was that, once we all start, right now we haven't even started with our surgery, like, whether it is gallbladder, appendix, or maybe in your own hospital, other specialties are not doing their bariatric procedure. If you are in a purely bariatric practice, wait for colleagues from other specialties to start up some elective work. Look how your logistics, how your patients are working, how things are panning out in your own setup. And I think that is so important because many times we get sort of a little bit guided by some international guidelines and recommendations, but we have to adapt them to our local facilities. So I would say that, look at what is happening in your institution, look how other people are starting elective operations, look if you can do some gallbladder, some hernia surgeries, it will be better. And once you are more confident that yes, these patients are getting managed, we can always step on to, in a graded manner to some elective bariatric operations.
Dr. Ajay Kumar, sir. Final points. Yes, sir.
Thank you, panelists, for your valuable inputs. As far as Kerala is concerned, things are slowly getting back to normal, and hospitals have started operating elective cases. Regarding bariatrics, to my knowledge, nobody has started bariatrics, and the inquiries and people who are willing to undergo bariatrics are also not there, I think. At least to my experience, patients, we have patients in the waiting list, but everybody is in a state of mind that we will wait for the corona time to be over. And regarding the restrictions, do other states have banned elective surgeries? Similar instructions have come from other states. In Kerala, the surgeons per se took a decision: we don't do elective cases, especially in government sector and private sector. Can anybody tell about other states?
So, Ajay, in Madhya Pradesh, I saw an order from the government 2 days back, which says that till 31st May, there should be no elective surgeries.
Okay.
So, yeah.
What about
Kerala is ahead of most of us, because you.
Okay, Dr. Praveen Raj, can you tell me the situation
Yeah.
in Tamil Nadu?
Yeah, so there is no official order as such that no electives have to be done. But then, as it is actually understood, we surgeons have taken a call that electives should not be done at this point. Let's just try to understand once the lockdown is over. And I think governments are mapping up green zones, orange zones, etc. So we'll wait for more orders. Although we have starting to do, I think many of the hospitals kind of the semi urgent operations as such, like some mild, not like emergencies, I'm saying semi urgent, like some painful hernias, some vague surgeries, like let's say a flatulent dyspepsia or a biliary colic with regard to gallstones. And few surgeries are happening, but then not in a really big numbers.
Yeah,
but then we need to understand more. But kind of electives are literally stopped, is what I should say.
Yeah, in government sector in Kerala, the malignancies they have taken up, and in each unit 1 or 2 surgeries per operation day. That too malignancies. That is the situation. And certain private hospitals they started doing elective cases. Bariatrics nobody has started. That is the situation in Kerala.
Okay. Thank you, panelists. Dr. Arun Prasad, sir, a few comments. Final closing comments, sir.
I think we can move on to the questions. Everybody has made such good presentation. There's not much left except to congratulate both you and Raman for this wonderful session.
Dr. Sandeep Agarwal, sir.
Sir, I think so. What Dr. Goel and Dr. Pallab said, this is obviously there's no time to restart bariatric surgery. So all of us should focus on reconnecting with our patients, with our families and friends, and this reconnecting will help us in updating our data. And maybe those who are inclined should now think of publishing their data, and for which all of us keep thinking we don't have time. Maybe this is a time to spend some time on contributing to the scientific literature, maybe learn something new like stats or whatever you are interested in. I think this is not the time to think about resuming surgery.
Thank you, Dr. Agarwal. So, shall I move on to the questions? We have a few questions.
Yeah. Sure.
So, there is one question from Dr. Prashant Verma. Issue of negative pressure versus positive pressure OT needs to be addressed, as every patient should be considered as a suspect positive. So, Dr. Sandeep Agarwal, would you take this question, sir?
Yeah, so the guideline is about having a negative pressure system, but there are changes which can be made by engineers as they have done in ROTs, where they could have this sort of a system without you don't need to switch off the ACs and all. So a negative pressure system is desirable, but I think we can these are just guidelines. But if it's not there, we have to look at other systems like so that the infection doesn't spread. So to decrease the
this was discussed in the various international forum also, and most OTs don't have a system of negative pressure. So what was suggested is that half an hour before the surgery, you turn off the positive pressure, and half an hour after sanitization, you turn it on. And this is what is being followed by OTs globally, where they don't have a facility of a negative pressure OT.
I think to add one more point, instead of worrying about negative pressure and positive pressure OT, all laparoscopic surgeons presently should worry about smoke evacuating systems and pneumoinsufflating systems, which have a filter, a good ULPA filter, ultra low particulate filter, which are available in quite a few companies right now. Ethicon has one, ConMed has one, Medtronic has one. All these machines can be utilized to make the environment much safer for everybody in the OR.
Quite right, Jaideep.
Exactly.
And in addition, you can have a additional 5 mm port through which your suction cannula could be present throughout the procedure. So you could be sucking it in, and this has to go again through a filter in places where they don't have a central suction system. Because if it's going to go into a manual machine, then it's going to again come out into the air.
Right. So there is another simpler way. Some Indian surgeon, I don't know from where, had shown a picture, because there are so many presentations coming up. So you put the filter of the anesthesia trolley to one of the port sites and then put it in an underwater seal. That becomes one of the simplest ways of taking out all the smoke, because it gets filtered also, and then it gets buried into the water, and then you just discard it.
Yes, and instead of water, you can use
you can do a disinfectant solution.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
10% hypochlorite.
We can improvise. What I mean to say is we can improvise and do very small basic things and make the environment safer for all of us to operate whenever it happens.
Jaideep, the problem with these improvisations or jugaads are that we don't know whether the viruses gets completely killed when they bubble through the hypochlorite solution for a second or two. And the risk of infection, because you are using a jugaad, unproven jugaad. So I think innovations have a place, but without proving their efficacy, they could prove very dangerous.
Yes, Raman, you are absolutely right.
Completely agree, sir.
A sense of overconfidence, and you create a situation which is worse than before.
Yes.
Fully agree.
Yeah, one more question.
But one of the issues that, like Dr. Sandeep Agarwal,
can't hear what
we were talking earlier, that peritoneum. So both sides, there is not enough evidence.
Sumit, I think there is some internet.
I think what Sumit is trying to say is what I just said, but in a different manner. What basically we mean to do is, right now there is not enough literature and data to support anything. So at least let's try and do whatever we can under our purview to help our patients, at least in a emergency and a semi-emergency situation where we can use these methods, because we don't have X or Y, like a negative pressure theater or a HEPA filter or an ULPA filter.
Yeah, Jaideep, with full PPE.
Yes, of course.
Of course.
Filters doesn't mean that you don't use N95.
No. With full PPEs plus this.
Plus this for all the staff in the OT.
Exactly.
Correct.
Minimize the number of staff, circulating staff, and for that plus PPE with all these staff getting the adequate precaution or equipment.
Okay, Amrit.
Yeah, so one
point
question for you, Dr. Goel, sir. This is from Dr. Kanagwell. What is the role of endoscopic interventions as an interim measure for people who are awaiting?
Yeah, so one thing there are pluses and minuses. Endoscopic procedures are considered more aerosol generating procedure today from both the system, from GI system, from respiratory system. So it is not it doesn't reduces the morbidity. The only way it reduces morbidity is in terms of surgical morbidity and if COVID infection happens later. So I think balloons can be considered, but I would not go for that measure at the moment. A patient who have waited 50 years to get a bariatric surgery done can wait for another 3 months or 6 months. Usually, in very rare situation, it's so an emergency, in a way, life-threatening at the moment. It is a life-saving procedure, but usually it's not a life-threatening condition. So I think endoscopic substitute is not a good option at the moment.
Yeah, Dr. Sandeep Agarwal, sir.
About the endoscopic options, I don't do much of endoscopy, but I will just completely agree with Dr. Goel that endoscopy carries an equal, if not more, risk of aerosol generation, and I don't see any reason why there's a hurry to go into any sort of intervention for obese patients as of now.
It's the same as intubating or bronchoscopy.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to
and
have...
Just one point I wanted to make about when we are planning to resume surgery, or even now, the surgical team should wait outside while the intubation is on. The duration has been kept from 15 to 20 minutes. One paper from Hong Kong said 3 minutes because their recycling rate was higher. So some amount of waiting is essential after intubation and before the surgical team enters the OT.
Sandeep, this is very nicely defined in this inter-association guidelines.
True, agree.
That came from actually All India Institute only.
Yes.
So that how many minutes you should wait at what stage of the surgery. Surgeons have to just look up on those guidelines.
Just wanted to re-emphasize it because it's a very simple measure to prevent yourself from intubation.
Question from Dr. Surendra Ogale. For emergency laparoscopic surgery, what safeguards for the anesthesiologist and the rest of the OT team, the OT staff? Intubation and desufflation aerosols, OT air purifiers, or ultraviolet light? So this again to Dr. Sandeep Agarwal, sir.
I think it's the whole webinar in itself.
Sorry, say it again. I just missed it. I just for a moment got distracted.
For emergency laparoscopic surgery, what safeguards for the anesthesiologist and the rest of the OT staff? Intubation, desufflation, OT air purifiers, UV light.
So as of now, we have not carried out any emergency laparoscopic surgery because most of the patients who are requiring emergency surgeries are basically perforation peritonitis, obstructed paraumbilical or inguinal hernias, and although until we have better, ECMO evacuation systems, I would not recommend laparoscopic management as of now during the current pandemic. That's my answer.
There's one question from Dr. Hema. More than the BMI, the association seems to be strongly negative for visceral morbidity and the risk for metabolic disease. So waist height ratio more than 0.5. There seems to be strong indication for elective metabolic surgery, even if the BMI is not so high. This one for Dr. Sumit Shah, sir.
Thanks, Hema, for asking this question. But from whatever literature that I have read till now, I think the association being made out is with the body mass index. Calculation of the visceral adiposity will require special investigations. And as you might imagine, those patients of COVID-19 which are critically ill or those who are in the ICU, it is not the time to calculate the visceral adiposity for them. So whatever 4 or 5 papers, whether it was from New York University or Dr. Leiter's paper in clinical infectious disease or the French study, which I read, were all relating to body mass index. What you might be saying may be correct, but I think in the current scenario of COVID-19, what correlation we currently have is with body mass index. If you are aware of any paper which is specifically relating it to visceral obesity, I would be glad to read that.
Okay, thank you, sir. The one question from Dr. Jayashree David. Nutrition is okay, but after how many days will immunity gear up after taking vitamin C and zinc, especially those who are having long-standing deficiencies? Maybe these will prepare them for the next COVID epidemic. What about now? Dr. Arun Prasad, sir?
Good question. I don't think anybody has the answer to this.
Arun, there are few presentations, obviously, that if you take about 60 grams zinc, the immunity boost, it helps prevent virus entry or replication within 5 to 6 hours. So I think, obviously, if there is a pre-existing deficiency, it makes things worse. But at least vitamin C and zinc helps in a very short interval after their intake. So I think Jayashree, a very pertinent question, and we should start. What about immunity for future? The COVID pandemic. Let's hope there is no pandemic at all in our lifetime. That's the safest way to live.
100 years later.
Yeah, 100 years later. Let's hope so. Arun, Amrit?
Yeah. One more question from Dr. Hema. Once the curve flattens for 2 weeks, eventually should we all get our antibody test done? At least those who are antibody positive needn't worry about retesting. So Dr. Goel, sir.
Amrit, so this was when antibodies were introduced, there was a lot of excitement about this. And I remember seeing a discussion on CNN where they said we test antibodies and we can send these people to work. But recent publications and the discussion that's happening says that antibody testing doesn't mean that they are not infective or they are not prone to reinfection. So how much antibody is protective against infection is still not established. So let's not get into that zone where we promote something and later on somebody is put at a risk of getting infected. So,
yes, an extremely important message, sir. Better to be safe till we have enough data. I don't see any
not only that, the antibody test kits that have arrived are of very dubious quality. So, we were all waiting. The government is importing 60,000 antibody test kits and ICMR distributed it to the states. And within 3 days came the directive that these test kits have not been shown to be of good quality and their results are varying. So again, antibody testing as a mass measure, which was done in South Korea, at least for now, has been put on hold till we have some better antibody test kits.
yes.
Yeah, so I don't have any more questions here. So Dr. Goel, sir.
Yeah. So thank you, Amrit. Thanks for moderating this session so well. And I also appreciate what Aussie is doing, bringing up youngsters forward to do the presentations. And I thank all my panelists today for being there and helping out. I wish we had more time to learn something from Ajay about Kerala model, but we'll definitely keep something later. Thank you so much, participants, for posting interesting questions. And let's hope that all of us are there when the pandemic gets over and all our patients and their families are safe. So thank you once again.
One last closing statement, if you don't mind. I think this is the time that time planet has taken to allow nature to reset. Let us use this time constructively and not worry about surgeries and how to get back into the OR. Let it take its own time and place, and it will happen soon.
So well said, Jaideep. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Raman. Thank you once again.
Thank you,
See you
sir.
all.
Sir.
Thank you.